So to start with today, I want to get an understanding of what order GameMaker will run your events in. All right, so out on the calendar, you'll note that I put out a presentation that goes over this ordering thing. This is a topic that's not really addressed anywhere in Game Design 1, so I wanted to go over this a little bit more in detail, and it'll help us as we write more complicated games in GameMaker. So the question is, did you ever wonder why the step event has 3 different versions? There's a step event, there's a begin step event, and there's an end step event. So that was the question I was trying to figure out. So there is an order of events that GameMaker uses to work through all the events for all the objects in your game. And it's actually quite interesting. You find a lot out about what happens behind the scenes inside a GameMaker game. Here's the order of events as I was able to figure out. So if you want something to happen before anything else happens per frame, you would put that in the begin step event. Now we're using this in Zool to draw the standing stationary Zool in the begin step. We'll talk about why we do that in the game. Next, any alarm events that need to happen. So it does all the begin steps for all the objects in the game, and then it does all the alarms for all the objects in the game. So it doesn't just do one object at a time and does everything for that object. It actually takes the objects through in different phases. So in the begin step phase, it does all the objects. In the alarm phase, checks for any alarms that have gone off. If so, execute that alarm code. Next up is any keyboard, key press, or key release events for all objects. And it's in that order. So keyboard takes precedence over key press and key release events. After the keyboard, then any of the mouse events that you might have. So mouse button, mouse press, and mouse release events are executed for all objects in the game. Finally, you get to the normal step event. So this is after the keyboard, after the mouse, after the begin step event, after the alarms. That's when all the step events get done. Now finally, right after the step event, all the instances of all the objects are now set to their new positions based on their current speed and direction. Now that everything's moved, you have to check for collisions between any of the objects. So it checks for collisions between the objects, and if there's a collision event defined or event handler for that event, then it does the code inside that collision event. Next, you do the end step event, and you do that for all objects in the game. And the last thing that gets done is the draw event. So everything's been moved, all the collision events have been taken care of, all the stuff in the end step event are done. Now it's time to draw it, so it's ready to draw the next frame. It's amazing that all that happens between frames. When your frame rate is about 60 frames per second, that's a lot of stuff that has to go on between frames. But that's what GameMaker does. That's how the GameMaker engine works. Why am I bringing this up now? Well, there's a problem in our Zool game, and we've got to fix it. Here's the problem. When we start Zool moving with the left key, so it does move Zool left. So we've been relying on the keyboard NoKey event to stop it from moving. But the problem with that is if there's any other key that's pressed down, after you press down the left key, the NoKey event will not be called because there's another key on the keyboard that's being pressed. So once you start left, if you have any other key down on the keyboard, it'll still keep going left, even though you're not pressing the left arrow, which is a problem. We've kind of avoided that problem or just ignored it, I guess, in other games. But this is where we have to fix that problem. So once an object starts moving left, you keep it moving left by holding down any key on the keyboard, even the right arrow key. If you press the left key down, you press the right key down, and then lift up on the left key, it's still going to go left, even though you're hitting right. So how do we fix this? And this is where the begin step comes into play. It says, we fix this by taking advantage of the event execution order, the order I just went over. You want to set the state to zstate stand in the begin step event, and then reset the state to zstate walk in the keyboard left and right events. If neither key is being pressed, then the state will still be zstate stand. So even though you might be moving from frame to frame, we're putting it in the standing state just right there in begin step before it ever gets drawn. And then it'll process the keyboard and set the correct state, either walk or stand, I guess. So it's kind of a kludge. What is a kludge? It's kind of not so pretty workaround to get this to work properly. But sometimes in coding you have to do kludgy coding, so this is one of those times. So since the step, collision, end step, or draw events occur after the keyboard events, then the left and right keys will set Zool to the appropriate state. However, any other key will have no effect on Zool's behavior. So now we've isolated it so that only the left and right keys will move Zool, and if you happen to be hitting other keys, it's not going to do anything other than just make him stand there. So that solves the problem. So again, a summary of the order. You do the begin step event for all objects, then all the alarms for all objects, the keyboards for all objects, the mouse. Finally, you move the objects to their new position. Then you do the step event, then the collision event, and the end step event, and then the draw event. I think I've got one out of order. Hang on just a second. The step event has to come before the object. So let's see if I have that in the slides. So when you're coding up your games now, you can kind of know what's happening behind the scenes, and you might be able to take advantage of it to fix problems that might occur in your code.